You know, it's kind of a tragedy. Dead Souls was a game that was meant to continue its life cycle until well into 2025, but was killed because we still don't really know. Motion Twins has said that it's because they didn't want it to stay its welcome, so they finished it before it lost its identity. But we also know that Evil Empire, which started working on Dead Souls after the Rise of the Giant DLC, had more plans, at least 2 more major updates they wanted to work on. It's why the latest update is called The End is Near and not The End is Here. Still, what that means for me is that I can make a full Dead Souls lore video without needing to wait for its final updates, which are never going to come. After that Babel video I did, I wanted to work on something more fun, which is why I'm making this video. Dead Souls has some fun lore, and I'm mostly making this video as a love letter more than anything else. This is going to be wildly different from my other videos, so I'm excited. Before we get truly started though, let's lay some foundations. Dead Souls takes place pretty much only inside one island. This island doesn't have a name. Even if it did, it has been long forgotten and discarded by this point. Most things in Dead Souls, even most people, don't have names but titles. For the sake of convenience, let's call the island England. England was a rather powerful island. It had royalty, military, and researchers. Overall, a decently advanced island. It held a lot of secrets and housed many inhabitants. From the Slumbering Sanctuary, to the Stilt village, to the Ossuary. It was a colorful place. Still is. All of that changed when a substance called the malaise entered the picture. The malaise is basically the infection, blight, zombie apocalypse of Dead Souls. Normally, it slowly kills people in whatever ways you can think of. Rotting, coughing, failure of organs. It is the ultimate disease. It is also heavily contagious in an almost unfair manner. But things don't end there either. The malaise can cause mutations of different forms. For example, once it kills something, sometimes that thing mutates into a zombie or some other kind of undead. In short, the malaise was a big problem. No one could figure out where it came from, but a researcher known as the alchemist theorized that it might have started from a place called the Slumbering Sanctuary and spread around by bugs and insects throughout all of England. Don't worry, I will go through the biomes eventually. For now, we're just laying foundations. So, now that we know about the malaise, what it does and what possibly caused it, the important thing is how the King of England decided to combat it. Well, at the very least, he did take it seriously. Too seriously, in fact. At first, he was ordering mass quarantines. But slowly and surely, he started imprisoning infected civilians outright and eventually even killing and executing anyone who could possibly be infected. If there was even suspicion, it was a death sentence. Anyone who went against his orders was executed, and all the resources that he had, he put into researching the malaise in order to find some kind of cure. Why? What exactly was his problem, you say? Nothing, he was just built that way. Cruel and evil, a total tyrant. He simply had no reservations when it came to committing atrocities. Clearly, he feared the malaise and probably death, so if you want motivations, there you go. Of course, the people started to rebel, vandalizing anything related to the king, from his statues to his notes. Riots were starting. People were planning on starting revolutions. But sadly, before anything could happen, the entirety of England fell victim to the malaise, and the ones that didn't get destroyed by it got brutalized by the mutations it created. This would have been a different story if the island was French. But alas, only the developers are actually French. As for the king, the queen, the hand of the king, and some of the other members of his court, well, no one truly knows what happened to them. As for the player character, he's simply someone called the Beheaded. Though, for the sake of this video, we will call him Bobby. Bobby is something. Not human, not zombie, and seemingly immune to the malaise. Bobby is a blob that can get into and control whatever corpses he comes across. It's clear that Bobby used to be someone, but he has no memories of his past life. As of now, his main goal is to go find and kill the king so that possibly some kind of change could be brought to the island. Even if it's basically a fallen kingdom. Now that I have laid out some foundations, we can start actually going through the game. With a game like Dead Souls, I feel like the best way to go about exploring its lore is going through all of the biomes and slowly piecing together a clear picture through them. The best way to go about this is to follow a playthrough, going from the beginning to the end. As you can probably tell, every death in Dead Souls is canon. Every time Bobby, in other words, you, dies, he gets back into the prisoner's quarters to challenge England once again. Every time you die, you are greeted by the same dead giant, the same axe, and the same space. The thing with the prisoner's quarters is that it is not just the starting area, but also the hub, the medulla. There are many NPCs here that do different things, from the tailor, to his daughter, to the doctor. There are many NPCs that are there for different gameplay mechanics or simply a smoother experience. I'm not going to go over these NPCs because, frankly, they don't really matter. Most of them are straightforward and don't have much lore. So, instead of focusing on them, let's focus on the prisoner's quarters as a whole. It is mostly filled with a bunch of undead of various types, from grenadiers to shield bearers to, well, regular zombies. A lot of the people that the king imprisoned ended up in this place. It's filled with many bodies, so it's perfect for a life form like Bobby. Some people were infected, some weren't. Most are dead. The head warden was someone called... How to pronounce this? Here.
Castaing.
Castaing? What?
Castaing.
That's not Castaing. YouTube video.
Castaing.
Castaing?
Castaing.
Are you... This is why people don't like the French. Here. Costa. That's stupid. Anyway, the head warden was someone called Costa. He wasn't really well versed in the arts of wardenry, but did his best to learn. Someone who tried his best not to torture, and someone who is clearly not in the prisons anymore. All in all, the prisoner's quarters is pretty much abandoned by the king's forces and is inhabited by whoever is actually still alive. Besides that, the prisoner's quarters also has a lot of crossover rooms where you can find weapons from different games. I don't think there's any lore to any of those rooms, so I'm not going to go over them. Unless the world of Dead Souls, Hollow Knight, Terraria, and many more games are actually combined, which I doubt. There are two other biomes that are fully optional that come later, which are connected to the quarters: the corrupted prison and the prison depths. These biomes have almost no lore and, as far as I can tell, are simply extensions of the prisoner's quarters. They are both the smallest biomes in the game and are the only biomes, not counting boss biomes and one other one, with no lore rooms. They don't come after the prisoner's quarters, they come after the biome after the prisoner's quarters. Even so, because of their nature, I think they fit better here. The prison depths are where the worst of the worst were sent to rot and die, while the corrupted prison is where the people were sent to be experimented on as they were alive. Either way, after you're done exploring the prisoners' quarters, you can go into the next biome. All biomes are connected via passages. In them, you can fully heal yourself, deal with the blacksmith or his apprentice depending on if you're going into a passage after a boss or not, and also Gillen, which gives you mutations that buff you. There is also a fellow that goes by, the Collector, who gathers all the cells that you get from each biome and unlocks you weapons and equipment, and also drip, depending on what blueprints you have. This man basically carries your game by giving you, Bobby, more options to fight with. Cells are basically loot which you get from every enemy, along with gold. The Collector wants to collect them, so it's a win-win situation for both parties. Other than that, there is nothing else in here, so let's move on to the next biome. A promenade is a paved public park, typically one along the seafront at a resort. I didn't know what that word meant, but I have to, because after the quarters, we go to the Promenade of the Condemned. It doesn't look close to the sea or anything, so I don't know what's up with that. It does have trees though. It's a very horizontal biome that has a lot of elevators going down, creating tunnels. This is another place that some people were quarantined into when the malaise was spreading. It has pretty much the same enemies as the quarters, but also a few tricky ones like runners and protectors. At one point, this used to be a tranquil yard, but after the malaise started spreading, everything changed and it became an extension of the prisons. Unlike the prisoners' quarters, where people were simply imprisoned, here, a lot of them were straight up executed if they were suspected of being infected by the malaise. Some still did get imprisoned, but a lot of them also died. This is the first place where we get a hint of the king, through the statues. We get to see how he looked, though some of his statues did get vandalized with the people in the promenade, because, you know, down with the tyrant. This is one of the places that the alchemist visited in his pursuit of research. It is where he got the idea that malaise got spread around by insects and rodents. Overall, there isn't much more to be said about this place. It was an execution ground for some of the infected and settlers. After reaching the end of this biome, Bobby can move on to the next one by going up through an elevator. If he doesn't get killed by the thousands of spikes, that is. After the promenade, the player, you/Bobby, reaches the Ramparts, a place that is perpetually bathed in the golden lights of the Earth Tree from Elden Ring. It is a series of towers that, while is different from the promenade, plays very similarly. Instead of elevators, you just go down by jumping, and then go back up to explore the next tower. It's basically the same thing. The guards that were noticeably absent in the prisoners' quarters fled here for safety. Not that it mattered, because those same guards got malaised anyways. It still held a few prisoners, but most were thrown back down into the promenade before they could go anywhere else. There are inquisitors, sweepers, and other forces of the king's military wandering about here. Again, the alchemist was here with the same notes. He's kind of stupid, probably has some kind of Alzheimer's. Maybe just a bit of stupidity, I don't know, like the R word. Some more people were brutally executed here, either via arrows or hanging. Sometimes both. The soldiers used the prisoners as target practice, but were also terrible archers, so the prisoners didn't die easily. From old people to children, none were spared. And because Bobby is also apparently kind of a bastard, he can steal their belongings that they were holding onto during their last moments. Most people who've died weren't even confirmed to have the malaise. They were simply suspected, then promptly killed. Either way, after taking an elevator down from the ramparts, basically going from the other side of the wall from the promenade, you reach the very first boss biome, which is the Black Bridge. The Black Bridge is, well, a black bridge. Basically, from the prisoners' quarters to the ramparts, every biome was basically a prison. The prisoners' quarters wasn't big enough, so those two biomes were also turned into prisons. But if some prisoner finally managed to go through all of that and reach the Black Bridge, they would get stopped by a creature known as the Concierge. Formerly known as Costa, the warden of the prisoners' quarters. Anyone who managed to go past everything I went over until now would get killed by him. Just like his fellow soldiers, he fled to the ramparts. Costa got hit badly by the Malays and turned into what you see now. The thing with him is that he was always stupid. As I already said, he studied how to be a warden by reading books. The whole thing with gathering suspected infected wasn't even meant to be a public thing. He was supposed to do it in secret. But sadly, he was stupid. And it was that stupidity that eventually led to people distrusting the king. Rightfully. Again, he was stupid. But he wasn't just stupid, he was also lazy. He actually had a sunbathing bed on top of his office in the ramparts. What a poser. He was hoarding money as well. From where? Who knows? What I do know is that Concierge is a really easy boss and that if you die to him, you should feel bad. Fuck! After finally escaping from the prisons, finally you can get into the Stilt village, which used to be the main settlement of England. Actually, it kind of still is. Except, instead of regular people, it has a bunch of people that want to kill you. It's a village close to the sea, and because of that, it has pirate captains, samurais, and other kinds of enemies. Of course, pretty much all infected by the Malays like everything else in the game. It actually used to be a fishing village. Now, the only thing that is getting fished is your innards. It is yet another very horizontal biome, except instead of going underground, this time you go into different houses and buildings. And yet again, the alchemist was here, and managed to produce somewhat subpar results in his quest for a cure. Not good enough. Still, while the people hated the king, they did trust in the alchemist very much. To the point that whenever someone got infected, they willingly became test subjects for the alchemist, just in case he could help their families and friends. Not that the Malays itself was the only problem. Living somewhere where anyone could get infected and spread that infection to others, killing everyone, was not good for one's mental health. Some people opted to simply take themselves out before getting infected by the Malays, and some even killed their loved ones to spare them from the pain of it. All of this mythical land, all of England was going insane, getting overwhelmed by the miasma that was the Malays and death. They all blamed the king for how he handled it. You could argue that the king did everything he could to stop the Malays, but he was also being a douche about it. Maybe a little effed up. Maybe a little dumb. Maybe just a little stupid. Maybe he just sucked. Anyways, just like the Promenade, Stilt Village housed many statues of the king, sometimes alongside his larger aide, known as the Hand of the King. Of course, most were vandalized, just like the ones in the Promenade. Worst thing was, even if you didn't get infected, even if you didn't try to off yourself, you still had no chance of surviving. The dead bodies created by the Malays infected the waters around Stilt Village, which caused the fish to stay away. Now, when a fishing village loses its fishing privileges, what happens? Well, those fishermen will have nothing to eat other than some leftover, rotten, stinky fish. So, even if you wanted to go against the king and cause a revolution, you would have no resources to actually do anything. In a way, the king was the least of their problems. If you were in Stilt Village, you would have to watch as your friends and family died to the Malays, or died to themselves, or killed by the king's forces. And if even that wasn't enough, it will only take some time for the people killed by the Malays to get mutations and turn into zombies that would try to kill you. At the very least, I can confidently say that it would not be a boring life. It's better than that. The king didn't just put his resources into the alchemist. At the edge of the Stilt village, Bobby starts to climb up the clock tower. But this isn't just the big bin. This tower, or at least someone inside, can control time to an extent. The Malays was unstoppable, and the king needed to buy time for the alchemist and his other researchers. Which is why he built the clock tower, inhabited by the timekeeper, formerly known as Assassin. In the clock tower, some of the king's more powerful and specialized forces are stationed, like automatons and dark trackers, and cannibals, for some reason. I don't know why he wanted cannibals in there, but he did. Maybe just some kind of weird culture of England, I don't know. It is a very vertical biome that branches out into different parts of the tower, forming some kind of fork. The alchemist was once again in this place. Unlike most other places, the alchemist spent a bit more time in the clock tower and even managed to find a way to slow down the spread of malaise throughout a body. Even so, once things got truly bad, he was forced to evacuate. Time is convoluted here, and in some of the rooms, it's downright diabolical. As Bobby puts it feels as if time is moving faster and slower at the same time, which gives everything a floaty feel. It even makes him sick, which makes me wonder about his biology. How is a blob getting sick? There isn't much to say about the clock tower itself, so let's instead go to the next boss biome, which is called the clock room. So, the clock room. There's a pink room with a big clock and it's pink. Yeah, that's it. But in it, there is also the timekeeper. Basically, what the timekeeper does is loop a single day over and over and over again. This halts the spread of malaise forcefully, which is the only reason why England is still somewhat alive. This, however, isn't something that she can do forever. It is merely a temporary solution. In the clock tower, in one of the rooms, she keeps a record of the infected that she kills every day. And they all are recorded as Day 1. Now, why would she go out of her way to write Day 1 every day? Just like the concierge, she must be stupid. Anyway, each and every day, her kill count decreases. Not because there are less people to kill, but because she simply doesn't have the energy to kill more. This time loop isn't something that she can do forever. We don't know the specifics of how it works, and admittedly, it is kind of frustrating. It isn't a full time loop, otherwise nothing would change. The only way this makes sense is if she is looping the time of a specific thing constantly and nothing else. So like, she is looping the progress of the malaise, killing the people that are already infected, making it so that malaise as a plague doesn't spread, while she manages to kill some of the infected in the meantime. This is pretty much speculation, but it's what makes sense to me. This is why you don't mess with time in fiction. Time is weird and always creates these inconsistencies. Either way, once you beat the timekeeper, she doesn't actually die, she simply flees the scene. I'm pretty sure this is when she rewinds time as well, but I'm not 100% sure. The real question is, if she is this vital to the survival of the island, why does Bobby fight her? Well, her clock tower is the final thing between Bobby and High Peak Castle, the residence of the king. There is a lot in High Peak Castle. It is the place where the king, the queen, and every other member of royalty resided. And of course, like everywhere else, it has been overtaken by the Malays. The more elite guards of the king are here, like the Guardian Knights and the Royal Guards. This is where the bulk of his troops have stayed, and where they all got infected. The king himself, though, is locked away behind a few doors, the keys of which are held by a few elite enemies that you have to fight. There are rooms, hallways, spikes, and whatever else people normally have in their castles. At the very least, it is a very clean place, even if it has a lot of zombies. There are 3 places where you need to find keys. One of them is a blue room which most likely housed the alchemist. There are potions, books, and people in jars. I guess he was a freak. The green room houses a lot of plants, which are also connected to the alchemist and his experiments. I will go over the green stuff later. And then finally, there is the red room filled with blood and torture chambers. Again, stuff connected to biomes I haven't covered yet. Either that or the red room was the king's freak chamber. There are also some lore rooms that don't have anything to do with gameplay. One of them is the guards' quarters where the Hand and some of the other soldiers slept. The king had 2 main aides, the Hand of the King and the Giant. These 2 people, along with the queen, were his main support. The Hand always supported the king, no matter what. He was a true follower. The Giant, on the other hand, knew that the way the king was handling the Malays was terrible, and he told them so. Unfortunately, that got him executed by the king. We can see a picture of him in one of the rooms, which looks eerily similar to the giant corpse in prisoners' quarters. The king was incredibly paranoid at the time and thought that someone wanted to assassinate him, which is why he had the giant killed as soon as he spoke up. This all happened privately, so the guards who actually quite liked the giant had no idea that he was killed. All they saw was the king removing a picture of the Hand and the giant, and nothing else. There is also another room that housed a picture of the king and the queen. In it resided the queen's servants. They are nowhere to be seen at this point, and their weapons are also missing. Besides that, there isn't much else to the castle, other than, of course, the throne room. The throne room is a very spacey place. You will understand by just looking at the screen. The stars are clear. On the throne itself sits the king, motionless, and beside him stands the Hand of the king. As soon as he sees Bobby, he puts the king in a protective bubble, then quickly jumps towards Bobby, ready to fight. The thing with the Hand is that he was always a worshipper of the king. Him and the giant never got along and had different visions of what a king should be. They both disliked each other, but for whatever reason, they both disliked the alchemist as well. Why? Well, there might be a reason, there might not be. What I mean by that is that it's not time to talk about the alchemist yet, but the Hand. There isn't much more to him. He isn't infected by the Malays, as far as we can tell, and has only been guarding the king all this time. He cares not for food, fun, or even dinosaurs, so you know he is stoic. All of that devotion and stoicism doesn't save him from getting mutilated by Bobby though, dropping his lance? Twin blade? The weapon that Thanos uses. The game calls it a lance, but it looks like a twin blade. Anyway, after you kill him, you can pick up his overpowered weapon that can break shields. But before you can do anything with it, like any good gamer, you go further back behind the throne. And in the back, there are more notes from the alchemist and an inaccessible door with 5 circles on it. You can't open it, so instead, you go back to the throne and using the Hand of the King's weapon, you destroy the protective bubble around the king and finally stab him with it. He doesn't react, he doesn't move, simply gets impaled by the lance. After that, he explodes, burning his throne. Because of that, Bobby loses the body he's controlling and is forced to go into a fountain all the way down, back into the prisoner's quarters, to control a new body. So, what was the point of everything I just went through? The king died, Bobby killed him, and yet he still gets back to the prisoner's quarters with nothing changing? Well, my friend, I have to say, congratulations. You have now just beat the tutorial. It's not just your deaths that are canon in Dead Souls, your wins are too. So, boss stem cells, what are they? Basically, after killing a final boss, you get one boss stem cell. Final bosses being the Hand of the King and 2 other bosses I will get into later. What these things do is make the game harder. They also unlock more content as well. I don't think there's any concrete lore to them, but they are needed to progress through the game. Maybe something that the alchemist came up with, probably something to do with the progress of the Malays, but again, it's not clear. But don't let any of that distract you from the fact that the giant skeleton is gone from the prisoner's quarters and a giant chunk of the starting wall is missing. I'm sure that's nothing important. Anyways, now that Bobby is back to the start, he needs a new goal. Killing the king seemingly didn't matter, so is there even a way to salvage England? What if, instead of doing such complicated stuff, Bobby decided to find a way to escape England instead? That is the basic premise that follows the green, grassy, eldritch DLCs. Basically, 3 DLCs that follow a set path that you can follow, starting from the Bad Seed to Fatal Falls, and then finally, the Queen and the Sea. And, of course, all of that starts from the prisoner's quarters, as all things in life do. Before actually getting to explore though, Bobby gets jump scared by a loud noise, and following it, he goes through a busted open gate, and inside it, he sees the giant skeleton diving down into the lava. I'm sure this won't come up later. As for the quarters itself, it has a new enemy. Actually, every biome gets more enemies depending on how many boss stem cells you have. Not that that matters, because I have already explained the prisoner's quarters. First DLC biome is the Dilapidated Arboretum. It's a hard one. On the way, Bobby encounters the dead body of the royal gardener, still relatively fresh. He had gotten specific orders from Costa. Of course, Bobby decides to steal his drip and leave his dead body where he is, going into the passage leading into the Dilapidated Arboretum. Little did he know the royal gardener's body disappeared right after. Not important, right? After all, nothing ever happens, as we all know. Everything in the passage is the same, from the collector to the blacksmith and to the broken health... Wait. Who broke that?! The Dilapidated Arboretum used to be a royal garden where the wealthy visited from time to time. It is made up of 2 roofed gardens, one of which is almost twice the size of the other. Now, for reasons unknown to the general public, the greenery in the Arboretum started growing sentience. It became aggressive. There were mushroom enemies around, and some other fauna enemies. The alchemist wanted one of these creatures alive to experiment on, and judging by the green room in the High Peak Castle, he did eventually get his wish. For whatever reason, fleshy beings like people and giant crows got stuffed into large bottles and trees, possibly to nourish the plant life in some way. As you can tell, the plants are enemies. There is a large pipe with a notice that writes not to water the plants. Because, you know, they're enemies. It was actually so bad that the king ordered the Arboretum to be burned down, completely and utterly. He didn't send just one order either, he sent multiple. Even so, the Arboretum is still very much so standing. Apparently, the gardener didn't want this to happen, and because of that, he lost the protection of the king, which is why we find his corpse in the prisoner's quarters. Either way, this is all seemingly a completely separate issue from the Malays. It's not clear what was going on in the Arboretum, but there are some speculations we can make. If we take the don't water the plants notice beyond face value, it is possible that the Malays contaminated the pipes, which eventually mutated the plants in the biome. Sadly, the pipes aren't actually open and expel their water somewhere else. So, maybe? Another possibility is that for whatever reason, the gardener was messing around with the plants in some weird experiments, sacrificing people to create weird new life forms. Which is why he was against the Arboretum being burnt down. Or maybe it was because the Arboretum was his only source of pay, I don't know. We know that the gardener got some orders from Costa, which, now that I think about it, are probably just orders to burn down the gardens. One last thing is that recently someone had visited the gardens having been revived, likely because of what was going on here. After staying for a while, they quickly left. For the most part, the Arboretum is a surprisingly mysterious biome. Not much else to say about it. The next biome is the Morass of the Banished. On this passage, you can see that not all of the healing flasks were destroyed, so that's nice. As for the Morass itself, it was where the sick, poor, and what many deemed worthless were banished to by the orders of the king. This isn't a Malay thing, this was a cultural thing of England. What makes this place dangerous is that it has a lot of giant, and I mean giant ticks around that like to eat people. Somehow, the people who were banished here managed to strike a deal with the ticks to stay alive. Basically, they could live there as they wanted, but also had to sacrifice people constantly. Once you enter the biome, you're immediately confronted by a giant tick mini-boss. There are 2 of these guys in the biome, and they can be quite annoying. In the treehouse itself, there are the Banished and the Blowgunners for the most part. The people here, while visibly malnourished, are pretty quick. Not that it matters, most are dead, infected zombies. The Malays actually hit this place quite hard. There is a reason why the king banished them. Poor people are truly filthy and unpredictable. The pipes that were in the Arboretum led here and expelled all of their water here as well. According to Bobby, who apparently has a nose, the water smells foul. Even so, it was the only source of water the people here had, so they drank it. Of course, that's not where things end though. The person who was revived in the Arboretum also visited here. Whoever he was, he kept losing consciousness, which is why we find his letters in different plant rooms. This place, which is apparently the worst place in England, has a cult as well, alive and well. While there are ticks here, there is one tick above all, the maternal deity of the Morass, called the Mama Tick. As I already said, the inhabitants of this place perpetually sacrifice their own to stay here. For that reason, they even have cells that keep people in before throwing them at Mama Tick, buying time until the next time she is hungry. Close to the door into the next biome, this Mother Tick even has an altar, which is looked after by the Swamp Priest, who is alive and not sane. A normal cult member, also the one who initiates most of the sacrifices. He's actually a pretty sweet guy with Bobby, and not hostile at all. He even helped the revived dude with a concoction which was apparently stomachache inducing. All the priest really wants is a sacrifice, and even if you don't give him one, he doesn't stop you from proceeding to the nest. After all, if Bobby is going to the nest anyway, why should he stop him? Either a sacrifice or Bobby himself. Both can nourish the Mommy Tick all the same. But if you do want to sacrifice, Mama Tick has a particular liking to plant life, like the ones found in the Arboretum. You can sacrifice a Mushroom Boy if you have one, which is a summoning gear you use in the game. If you do it, you won't have to fight Mama Tick. But if you don't, well, you will have no choice. On the background, you can see a bunch of crucified Banished, all sacrifices to the Mama Tick, which is a giant wall of monstrosity with a really annoying attack pattern. Dumb boss, I hate her. Just goes underground, spams quick attacks before coming out annoying. Just kill her, don't even give her the chance. She's annoying. After that, you can head to the next DLC areas from Fatal Falls. One thing you need to know is that the king despised religion, at least ones not belonging to the island. Every cult and religion was always banished to the outskirts of England. This is the one thing that he always got unanimous support on as well. One of these cults was banished to what is now called the Fractured Shrines. No one knows where this cult originated from, but most likely it came from outside the island. No one wanted to go there, the king didn't want anyone to go there, the pagans didn't want anyone near their shrines, you get the point. Whatever this religion was, they most likely worshipped snakes. As for the biome itself, it's a bunch of sky islands forming an X pattern. There is also the second most trap-filled biome in the game. You will fall to the void often. There are also a bunch of tricky teleporty enemies, which is fun. The revived guy also came here to ask for help with his undead problem, but because the whole place was already malazed, he couldn't get much. Surprisingly though, the queen held some of her stash in these very same fractured shrines, most likely being connected to the cultists in some way. And in her stash, you can always grab a guaranteed legendary gear. This is the only biome that has a guaranteed legendary armament. Other than that, all over the place, there are dead cultists. Bobby can either steal their outfits or straight up possess them. You kind of need to do this because the next biome needs you to disguise yourself as a cultist to sip in it for the first time. Otherwise, its gates won't open. So, after Bobby grabs his legendary weapon and possesses a cultist's dead body, he can go ahead and go into arguably one of the most important biomes in the game, the Undying Shores. At first, the Undying Shores belonged to smugglers before it was turned into yet another banishment place by the king. Seriously, what the hell was wrong with the king? Half the island is either banished or like the other half is a prison. What the hell, man? It's not a problem with him either. England is just a wild place. The people who were banished into the Undying Shores were mostly his doctors and researchers, known as the apostates. All of which wanted to experiment on dead bodies because... lol. They were robbing graves because they were just a little silly, possibly a little goofy, nothing harmful. They didn't even start because of the malaise, they just wanted to do it beforehand. At the end of the day, knowledge is much easier to obtain when forsaking morals. The apostates knew this very well. The biome is basically a giant cliff you climb down from to reach the sea level. There are apostates, failed homunculi, and other kinds of zombies that the apostates revive with necromancy. The king had even ordered their deaths, suspecting the apostates of being the ones responsible for the malaise. And if they could steal the knowledge of the apostates as well, maybe the alchemist could use that knowledge to combat the malaise. Surprisingly, the alchemist was here at some point. It's been a while since we talked about him. He doesn't really like the DLC biomes. He was quite impressed with the advancements the apostates had made regarding life and death. While the malaise had hit the Undying Shores hard as well, the apostates actually managed to combat it really well with their experiments. At the time of his visit, at least. He managed to deal with the apostates gaining access to their knowledge. As far as you could tell, they had found a way to fully combat the malaise. It wasn't a perfect method, but it was impressive. Sadly, it wouldn't be of any use to the alchemist because he had his own leads on how to combat the malaise. One thing I have to mention is that Bobby feels very uncomfortable in this place. More so than any other biome. The whole place feels familiar to him as well. From the tubed bodies to the experiments, as if he had been here before. In one room, Bobby can find a bunch of dead apostates, all of which he hates for reasons he doesn't know. All the apostates were brutally killed, so whoever killed them must have hated them too. Slashed, crushed, and arrowed. But the thing that truly freaks him out is that the door was already broken. If you have been watching the background footage, you must have seen me break down 1,000 doors by now. That is kind of Bobby's thing, which is the confirmation we need to say with 100% certainty that Bobby was created here. Who was he before becoming a malaise immune homunculus? Not important, for now. Most likely, he's also the one who killed the apostates here. Slashed, crushed, arrowed. brutality, survival, tactics. The 3 classes that you can choose from every run. Bobby was the apostate's masterpiece, the life form pretty much immune to the malaise. But right after creating him, they were killed by him and soon after got completely taken over by the malaise, unable to continue their experiments. That is one very big mystery out of the way. Or is it? Bobby was definitely created here, that's for certain. But was he the one created in this specific room? Or was someone else created here and possibly rescued? Well, we can figure that out. Seemingly, Bobby wasn't the first person to try and escape the island. Many others tried, but some were, for whatever reason, discouraged. The revived person who leaves letters everywhere did come here as well. Of course, he didn't manage to get much help even from necromancers. His time being conscious was getting shorter and shorter. His last hope was the lighthouse in the distance. But he was getting very tired, so he had no choice but to get down from the cliff and rest for a bit. After all, what is the worst that could happen? By now you have probably figured out that the revived individual who I keep bringing up is the royal gardener. Probably due to his experiments with plant life, his malaise infection changed him in a different way from other infected. He turned out stronger and actually managed to keep his sanity after dying, at least for a while. And finally, we get to fight him as a boss in the mausoleum. At this point, he has fully lost his consciousness and is simply hanging around in the mausoleum, attacking Bobby on sight. He has sight, summons mushroom enemies, and throws explosive mushrooms at you. He's a really annoying boss, too fast. You need to parry him if you want to actually deal damage to him. I hate fighting him, almost as much as I hate fighting Mama Tick. As a boss, he's called the Scarecrow because he's a scarecrow. After you finally kill him, maybe for real, no revivals, you can finally try to make your way to the lighthouse in the distance, to try and maybe signal a ship for help. But, for whatever reason, the lighthouse is surrounded by shipwrecks, all destroyed and floating. So, before Bobby can finally go into the Lighthouse of England, he has to first navigate through one of the largest biomes in the game, the Infested Shipwreck. The Infested Shipwreck is just a bunch of destroyed shipwrecks. Absolute poetry. Why do ships keep sinking near the lighthouse? Well, due to something that has taken refuge at the top of the lighthouse. It has armored shrimps, mutineers, and pirates. This biome, along with the corrupted prison and prison depths, are the only biomes with no lore rooms, because there really isn't much to be said about the infested shipwrecks. It just feels like you're exploring a biome with a bunch of destroyed ships stuck together, forming a sort of mini-island. Other than that, it's just a shipwreck. A little Lovecraftian, but still just a shipwreck. Which finally leads us to the lighthouse. Finally, Bobby will be able to light the lighthouse and possibly escape the island. Biome-wise, this is on the same level as the Hand of the King, and it also houses a very unique boss fight. The second best boss in the game, I would say. The best hasn't showed up. Basically, in yet another place blessed by the Earthtree's light, you start to climb up the tower. During the climb, you fight the servants, specifically the servants of the Queen. At the bottom, you encounter Calliope, and in that moment, the chandelier breaks and starts raging fire. You climb up while dodging her fast enough to outpace the fire. After a bit, you fight her one-on-one, after which she heals up, forcing you to climb again. Then you come across Uterp, and you have to climb while dodging the two servants, and then fighting him 2-on-1. After they heal again, you climb once again and encounter Clio, and you are forced to outrun 3 of them and then finally take them out in a 3-on-1. I don't know why I went over the mechanics of this fight, but I did. If you remember, there was a room in High Peak Castle with weapons missing. These 3 were the owners of those weapons and they had fled to the lighthouse. They individually don't have any lore, but the Shipwrecks as a whole were always alongside their queen. The queen at the top of the crown. The queen overlooking the ins and outs of England from the top of the lighthouse. By the time you fully climb the lighthouse, it is night time. The fire that started at the bottom has reached all the way to the top surrounding the crown. As a biome, there isn't much to be said about the crown. It is another boss biome like the lighthouse, but unlike the lighthouse, the only important thing here is that you can fall off the edge if you go to one side far enough. The important thing here, or I guess person, is the Queen of England, the one who is responsible for turning off the lighthouse and the infested shipwrecks. As you can tell, just like Bobby, she is a homunculus. But why did she turn off the lighthouse and forcefully cut England off from the rest of the world? Well, as she saw it, the island was screwed. There was no saving it. The Malays had fully violated it. But, at the very least, it was only the island that was like this. If England got into contact with other places, the Malays would naturally break out of England into the wider world, which is why she sinks every ship she sees. The Malays has to be contained. This was her way of combating it. As for her origins, she is in some way connected to the fractured shrines, and if you remember that one room in the Undying Shores with the apostates, she is likely the one that was trapped there and turned into the homunculus we see now. Eventually, she got rescued by the servants and took over the lighthouse. But most strangely, she knows Bobby in one way or another, and she is mean. During her fight, she talks a lot of smack. If she manages to kill you without having done much damage to her, she holds it in her hand and forces her life energy into you, just to beat you up again. As I said, she's a little mean, a bit of a bully. Still, once you manage to defeat her, you kick her off the lighthouse into the fire and finally lights the lighthouse up once again. Finally, Bobby will be able to escape the island. Sure, he might take the Malays with him, but oh well, gosh, who cares about a possible plague reaching the outer world? Bobby is bored, he needs friends. Soon he spots a ship off in the distance. A beautiful one, the greatest ship you have ever seen. His escape vessel. He waves at the people on the ship. His saviors, his benefactors, his zombies. Infected by the Malays. It seems that the Malays had already reached the wider world. That's... Yep. Back to the prisoners' quarters we go. Welp, all of that was pointless. BC2, now all the big health flasks are gone, replaced by smaller ones. At least now Bobby has 2 boss stem cells. So, now that the king is dead and escaping from the island is pointless, I guess we have no choice but to explore the rest of it. Starting with the toxic sewers. It is a green biome, except the green this time isn't plants but toxic wastes. Basically, this was where all the trash got dumped. Because of that, it is rather filthy, to a dangerous degree. It has rats, scorpions, Asmongold, and other dirty creatures as enemies. It is basically several tight yet large areas connected by pipes. Because we are back in the base game, Alchemist was here. He wasn't doing anything important here, simply wanted some materials. Still, it's good to have Mr. Main Character back. There is this one side quest here, kind of a side quest, not really a side quest that you need to do to get an upgrade. I haven't talked about the upgrades because they don't really have any lore. Basically, there is this one guy stuck in some bars and he tells you to go get him his rune, which lets him teleport. Bobby goes and finds it, of course, but when encountering him again, decides not to give him the rune. Why? Because... lol, sucker. It's Bobby's rune now. After giving him the middle finger and returning in a future run, You can see his body crushed by his own treasures. And of course, you steal all of it. Other than that, the sewers were one of the main reasons why the malaise spread so rapidly. Basically, the dead infected bodies in the Promenade, prisons and other places were sometimes dumped into the sewers. There, they infected the waters, spreading across all of England. This could have easily been avoided. Not all of the bodies were dumped in the sewers, but a lot were. Still, there is a reason why the people hated the king. In another part of the sewers, you can find an infected dead body undergoing mutations. A bloated body with tentacles, tackling two fetishes at once. Something was likely birthed from it, make that 3 fetishes, and started roaming the sewers, leaving goo everywhere. Which leads us to the ancient sewers, which is just the toxic sewers, but more. The ancient sewers was the part of the sewers that grew too filthy, which made the king decide to just abandon it. There was no cleaning or saving it, it had to go. No one really knows what happens here, and no one really wants to know either. There are worms, festering zombies, you, and other hopeless beings here. There are traps, toxic pools, and generally it is not a very welcoming place. Structure-wise, it's basically the same as the sewers, except this place has more rewards at the end of it. The alchemist was here too, but for the same reasons as the toxic sewers, so it's not important. You can also find a place with a cocoon. The thing that was leaving goo everywhere eventually found its way here and made a cocoon for itself. The sight makes Bobby into a philosopher. By this point, the cocoon was already hatched and had traveled a bit further. The lore rooms concerning this cocoon creature can be found in both the toxic sewers and the ancient sewers, but I'm making a timeline here. Soon after, the creature made another cocoon for itself, this time growing even larger, huge even. According to a note left by a guard, this creature was soon chained and taken into custody. The guards were meant to guard it, but, well, no guards remain here. There isn't anything else here other than the path to the insufferable crypt. This crypt was made into a storage room before the malaise. Then it was turned back into a crypt and finally became the prison of the Conjunctivius, the cocoon creature. This thing eats people. They used to feed it for a while, but after the guards left, it had nothing to eat. It hungered and hungered, and now it won't hunger for longer. Not with you here. There isn't much to say. There are platforms here and you have to damage her until all of her chains are broken, after which she will die. She summons tentacles every now and then, which you have to kill to damage her. Kind of annoying, but not anywhere near as bad as something like the Mama Tick. At the very least, the Conjunctivius won't be hungry anymore. After that, finally, we have the Slumbering Sanctuary. We are slowly running out of biomes. The Slumbering Sanctuary is weird. It was there before England colonized it, and no one truly knows what is up with it. It is right below Stilt village, and according to some people that have visited it, it feels alive. The biome as a whole is rather interesting. At first, you explore hallways dealing with invisible enemies until you turn on the switch, after which everything lights up, a bunch of doors get opened, enemies get woken up, and you get to explore large gardens. It has some rather ancient robotic enemies, like golems, maskers, and dancers. In its walls there are glowing blue, orange after turning on the switch, sap-like substances oozing out. There aren't many lore rooms here. There is the one place to get the emergency door, but it doesn't really matter and is more of a joke. The only other lore room here is the alchemist. According to the alchemist, there is a high probability that this sap-like substance that is flowing all around the sanctuary, like it's blood, is the culprit behind the malaise. Being that it's close to the sewers, it could infect the waters of the island with ease. Of course, this is only a theory, but still it is the biggest lead he has had thus far. If it's true, then from the sap, he could create vaccines. He knew that time was running out. The timekeeper was halting the spread of the malaise well enough, but that wouldn't last. The alchemist had to find some way to find a cure, no matter what. Slumbering Sanctuary is probably the most mysterious biome in the game. There is barely any lore to it, but it feels like there should be. It has been there since before the creation of England, has enemies you pretty much don't see anywhere else, and is directly connected to the Malays. If I had to guess, if Evil Empire had been given more time, this biome would have been expanded upon in one of the large updates, but then again, this biome was created when Motion Twin was still developing the game, so I really don't know. I wish this place had more lore rooms because it really needed it. I wanted to talk about Forgotten Sepulchre here, but I'd rather save that for later because it's connected to some other biomes before it, so I'm going to skip it for now. After that, you can find the Timekeeper again, and after that, we get into Hell. Also known as, why does this biome exist? Also known as, I don't wanna be here. AKA, the biome you go into to get a Tesla coil and leave behind forever. And finally, also known as the Direlict distillery. They make bombs here. A lot of bombs. Everything kills you here, and everything hates you. There are a few rooms here that are always scrambled every time you get into it. From the place you will die, to the place that will kill you, to the place that will make you cry. There are walls that you can blow up if you don't blow up first. At the very least, you can find a battle launcher here, which might help you. Possibly. Every now and then. I don't need to go over the enemies. If it blows up, it's here. At first, this place used to be an alcohol making factory before being turned into what it is now. You know things are bad when you're in a base game biome and the alchemist still isn't inside you. Exploring and learning about you. Intimately. I don't know why I said it like that. Most wild thing though is that it is right beneath High Peak Castle. I don't know what the hell the king was cooking, but he should have been executed a long time ago. We don't even know why this place was turned into a bomb-making factory. I can't even possibly conceive why. To combat the Malays? Do you need explosions for that? To strengthen military? I guess ships do need explosives, but still. Right beneath the castle? You know what? I know why this place was created. It's because the king is crazy and mental. Going from the Slumbering Sanctuary, which also has no lore, into this is such a whiplash. They both have no lore, but in different ways. How can there be such two different zeros? I'm sick of this place, let's move on. After this, you get back into the throne room and the king is missing, which supports my Timekeeper theory. Kinda. So instead of putting on a force field over the king, the hand of the king simply slams the ground before jumping into battle with you. And after you kill him, you get your third boss stem cell, and go back into the quarters, never to return to the distillery again. BC3. Now you have scroll fragments and some of your flasks are gone. Cool. Whatever. Now, this is going to be the most difficult part of this video for me. The Castlevania DLC. Now, I know that the Castlevania DLC is technically not canon, but I'm going to go over it anyway. Because I want to. I have never played a Castlevania game in my life. I have no experience with it, but I will try my best. But then again, I have watched the Netflix show and have been Radiant and KG in Hollow Knight, so I'm basically a Castlevania lore master. The DLC starts with diagonal stairs. Yes, Castlevania biomes have diagonal platforms, which is unheard of in England. Before actually entering the first biome, you meet Richter in the prisoner's quarters. He doesn't really trust you because, you know, your head is on fire, but he also chooses not to be picky. He needs your help to get rid of a great evil. Richter Belmont is a character that appears in a lot of Castlevania games and is the protagonist of Rondo of Blood. And so, due to his request, you go into the castle outskirts. Not High Peak Castle outskirts, but Dracula's castle outskirts. I'm sure you all know who Dracula is. If you don't, I wouldn't even know where to start. Basically, he's the main antagonist of most Castlevania games and nothing else. Dracula didn't exist before Konami. He has always been the immortal vampire lord with superpowers. In the passage leading to the biome, you will notice that the Collector got replaced with Shenoa, which is the heroine of Order of Eclipse. I don't know these games. She does the same thing as the Collector and talks weird. So, let's just get into the outskirts. First, you have to open the gates. Afterwards, you can start exploring. Castle's outskirts is basically the opposite of Undying Shores. Whereas in the Undying Shores you climb down, in the castle outskirts you periodically take an elevator up, trying to climb up as high as possible. You'll encounter classic Castlevania enemies like the Mermen, Throwmasters, and Dr. John Seward. You can basically see the castle from the biome. During your time in this biome, you can meet Maria Renner, which is a distant relative of the Belmont clan. The Belmonts are basically vampire hunters. She is locked up, and you need to free her from her cell by interacting with her cat to get a key. And with that key, you can free her. She's, energetic. In other words, after you let her yap for a bit, you can take your cat as a summon. She's at the top of the elevator, so you have to almost finish the biome to get to her. At the bottom of the elevator, you can get Alucard's shield and wake him up from his slumber. Alucard is Dracula's son and is a very iconic character that has a lot of daddy issues. Can't believe I'm talking about Castlevania lore in the Dead Cells video. He is used to waking up to fight Dracula, so he gets straight to the point and tells you to meet him at the castle. Now, the way this DLC works is weird. If you choose to go to Dracula's castle after the outskirts, you won't get to fight Dracula. It is only after you beat a mid-level boss that you can get into a harder version of Dracula's castle and fight him there. At first, you have no choice, but because I have done this quest before, I can choose to go to a different biome. For now, I have talked enough about Castlevania lore, so let's get back to Dead Cells lore and talk about the Ossuary. You remember how I said that they dumped dead infected bodies into the sewers? Well, that was only like 5% of the bodies. Most of the dead bodies of the prisons were thrown into the Ossuary. At first, it was just another part of the prison, but after a specific event called Night of the Bloody Riot, you don't need to remember this, it doesn't come up again, it got turned into the Ossuary. Every now and then, the guards used to set fire to the Ossuary to clean it up. It was simply the quickest way. Some of the dead bodies even melted together. How wholesome. The alchemist was here at some point to experiment on some of the dead bodies. He needed to experiment with the sap he got from the Slumbering Sanctuary, and where else could he find so many specimens? Sadly, the results were beyond unpredictable. He couldn't make heads or tails of anything he found. He had as much sap as he could ever want. He had access to as many bodies as possible. But what he didn't have was time. He could probably find a cure like this, but by then he would probably die to the malaise. Maybe the king was right in his approach. Maybe the best way to combat this unbelievable infection was to be as cold-hearted as possible. In hindsight, we know that the king died on his throne, so this is not true. But at the same time, the malaise still hadn't taken over England at that point. Now, if you forgot how the malaise worked, let me remind you. First, malaise kills you. After it kills you, you die. While you're dead, the malaise starts mutating your dead body. After it's done doing that, most likely, you will turn into a zombie. So, what happens if the malaise infects a corpse? Well, it would probably just become a zombie, right? So, by now, I'm sure you can imagine how easily the guards placed in the Ossuary got overwhelmed by the undead monsters roaming here. The guards very quickly lost their faith in the king and tried to find more peaceful methods to combat the malaise, with the help of the alchemist. But the alchemist could do nothing to help them, and those guards quickly joined the piles of dead bodies in the Ossuary. The alchemist did manage to take a lot of bodies into the Red Room in the IP Castle though, so good for him. Besides that, there isn't anything else here. Once you are done with the biome, you can choose to go into the Black Bridge to fight Costa again, or go to the Master's Keep, where you should be able to fight Dracula. So, back to Castlevania we go. Master's Keep is the place where you get to fight Dracula. It is his throne room. In Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, Master's Keep is the location before the final location of the game. Basically, you get your last plot points wrapped up here before the final battle with Dracula, which takes place in the throne room, which is in Dead Cells, is where you fight the Hand of the King. They couldn't just make another throne room biome, so they named Dracula's boss room Master's Keep. But before you can actually get into it, you get wrapped by chains and are forced back down away from Master's Keep, and you get taken to the defiled necropolis. I don't think this place has a counterpart in Castlevania. In Portrait of Ruin, you don't just fight Dracula as the final boss, you fight an entity called Death as well. And in the defiled necropolis, you are forced to fight Death. In Castlevania, Death isn't, the concept of death. Death is actually Dracula's second in command. He's a spirit that feeds off of death, which is why him and Dracula are such good friends. Because, Dracula kills people. A lot. Still, at the very least, in Dead Cells, you don't have to fight the two antagonists at once. Once you kill him, Alucard appears telling you that Dracula is fully resurrected and that he needs time to come up with a new plan to combat him. In a different run, you get to see him again in the prisoner's quarters, telling you to meet him at the clock room. Once I'm done with all the Castlevania stuff, I will try to explain why Castlevania even exists within Dead Cells. For now, Bobby needs to find his way back into the clock room. Until then, we have more Dead Cells lore, starting with the graveyard. The graveyard is in the same situation as the Ossuary, in that it is filled with dead bodies. And just like the Ossuary, it got hit with the malaise. The people buried in the graveyard are, for the most part, not important. Back in the day, it was a fine place to bury your loved ones as a commoner living in Stilt Village. Now, it's a death valley. It starts out as a horizontal level until you find a key and descend underground. Catchers, maskers, and a bunch of zombies. Of course, the alchemist was here as well. He had carried some burnt corpses from the Ossuary into this place, but they were decomposing, so he had to move again. Why not use the dead bodies in the graveyard? Well, unlike the Ossuary that had only recently started piling up with bodies, the graveyard has been getting filled up for a very long time now. Most corpses here are skeletons by now, which aren't useful, even if the malaise was giving them corpses constantly. People were constantly burying their loved ones here at some point, from their lovers, to their children, and even themselves. At first, all the bodies were meant to be buried in the graveyard until it got filled up. The king took notice of this, which is why the Ossuary is what it is now. For the most part, there isn't anything else of note here, so here's the question. If only poor people were buried here, where were the richer ones buried? The Forgotten Sepulchre is one of the more unique biomes of the game. Basically, it has a light mechanic where if the light around you goes out, you start taking damage. You replenish light near the light sources and it goes away with time. There's a labyrinth you have to teleport through. Only after going through 2 locked doors will you finally be able to move on to the next biome. It has mummies, cleavers, and other death-related enemies. This is the only place where the High Society of England was buried. There is a loreless NPC here and the worst skill in the game. The alchemist was here for a bit, but due to the annoying darkness, he couldn't stick around for long, and he had to continue his travels. Surprisingly, there isn't much else here in terms of lore, but I do think that this place and some of the earlier biomes of the game that I went over in this BC are related to the most recent additions to the game, the cursed biomes. Maybe. Once you get into BC2, you start encountering cursed biomes. Any biome can become a cursed biome, symbolized by the skull hovering over them. Basically, cursed biomes make a biome harder to go through, while also making those biomes more lucrative. Cursed biomes add 3 new enemies into whatever biome you're going through. Cursors, Doombringers, and Sore Losers. Sore Losers have no lore, but the other 2 do. Kind of. In the graveyard and Ossuary, you have a chance to encounter an altar with the Cursor's mask, and the body hanged from the ceiling. It looks cultish, and even Bobby comments on the professionalism. One thing to note is that Cursors have Plague Doctor masks, which are really fitting for the island. And then you have the one rooming Stilt village with an elite Doombringer. Once you kill him, you can look around the place, and in it is a bunch of misinformation and /or attempts to steer the public from saying that the Malaise is fake to saying that the Queen is basically a serpent. Doombringers seem to, well, bring doom. All these 3 enemies can curse the player. Curse, as a mechanic, is simple. If you are cursed, and if you get hit, you die, no matter the damage. And to get rid of a curse, you have to kill until its counter reaches 0. Every time you get a curse, a message pops up, telling you that you have angered the gods. This is the only time that gods are mentioned in this game. Curses aren't a rare thing either, they're really common. If I had to guess, there is a cult, actually it might be a genuine cult, revolving around curses, and cursors, Doombringers, and Sore Losers are members of such cult. They also most likely only stick around in high mortality places, like the Ossuary and the graveyard. Still, one problem. The updates that brought cursed biomes into the game, the End is Near update, had to stop development during its development. When Motion Twins forced Evil Empire to stop working on the game, The End is Near was still in beta, and once the update actually released, Motion Twins added nothing to it, which leads us to where the game is now. So, most likely, there was more planned for cursed biomes and curses in general, but we will never know. Oh well. No point in wondering over what never was. Let's just go into the clock room and continue the Castlevania questline. After beating the Timekeeper, you come across Alucard, and with him, you go into Dracula's castle. Dracula's castle is in pretty much every single Castlevania game and is the residence of, well, Dracula. Here it is very red. It also has a very particular structure to it. You start out in a long grand hallway stretching out into 2 pathways. Both ways lead to another long hallway which branches out into 2 different rooftops. Other classic Castlevania enemies are here, like the Boer and the Axe Armors, and I don't even know, Von Helsing. There are several differences between Depth 3 Dracula's Castle and Depth 6 Dracula's Castle. In Depth 6, Dracula's Castle is the same as Depth 3, just with more content. For one, in the bottom right of the map, you have to fight a Medusa to get a key that will actually lead you into the Master's Keep. Another big difference is that every now and then, Dracula shows up to do one action every minute or so. You can either choose to curse your food, flip the screen, kill the shopkeeper, throw fireballs at you, throw bats at you, create ghost enemies, or even turn a regular enemy into an elite. If you die at the castle, he even taunts you. You can't hit him, you just have to deal with him. In the castle, you can find a bunch of references to Castlevania games. You can find Carmela's mask, which gives you the Simon outfit, Carmela being another vampire and Simon being another Belmont. You can find a room full of dead bodies glued together. In the Castlevania games, this thing is a boss called the Legion, which is basically a core surrounded by dead bodies. In most games, you have to shave the bodies down to get to the core, like a lollipop. After that, you can kill it. Here in Dead Cells, it's not alive, so you don't have to worry about it. There is a room in which you can sit down and watch 2 ghosts dance. It's pretty chill, honestly. You You can't even find a save room, which does nothing due to the nature of Dead Cells. If you turn on continue mode, instead of going back to the start of the biome, you go here. Otherwise, it's just a cool dice. And finally, we have the cage in which Richter gets caught in. Yes, while you and Alucard were dying and sweating, this man got jailed. Apparently, he went and fought Dracula by himself, which is why he is here. Bobby frees him because Bobby is a great moral upstanding guy. He has never done anything wrong. A model person. Here is the fun part. In another run, if you come back here and interact with Richter's Broken Cell, you can play Richter mode, exclusive to Div 6. In Richter mode, you play as Richter, with movement that feels completely different, more floaty. In this mode, you explore a non-generated Dracula's castle in a mini Metroidvania. All the Castlevania enemies are here, and there is even a unique enemy here, which is the Bone Pillar. You can't find it while going through Dracula's castle normally, only in Richter mode. There are a few upgrades you have to get before going to fight the boss here. For movement, you get a dash and a high jump. There are also 3 skills that you can get: Holy Water, a Cross, and a Rebound Stone, all of which appear in Castlevania games. In the right side of the castle, you can find Alucard, which quickly turns into a bat, leaving you with a blueprint for his sword. Sadly, the boss here isn't Dracula, but another Medusa. After killing the Medusa, you finish Richter mode and are sent back to play as Bobby. Supposedly, after that, Richter goes to fight Dracula by himself, which is what gets him imprisoned in the first place. So, Richter mode is kind of a memory. It will also be him exploring Dracula's castle after you free him, so honestly it doesn't matter. It's just fan service for people who like Castlevania, and a really good one at that. So, after exploring all of Dracula's castle, you can finally move on to Master's Keep, and finally fight Dracula. Before entering the room with Dracula, you meet Alucard and Richter. Alucard doesn't want to fight Dracula for reasons, and Richter is too tired, which leaves just you, Bobby. Bunch of lazy pieces of crap. Anyway, depending on which outfit you have when you go in, you get different dialogue exchanges with Dracula. I'm sure you can find all of them on YouTube if you want to, so I won't go over them here. There is a lot. If you go without any Castlevania outfits, you get the regular exchange, where Dracula and Bobby taunt each other until Bobby says that Richter was a man worth saving. After that, Dracula shatters his wine glass and goes on about his epic "What is a man" speech. After that, you can fight him for real. He fights exactly how you would expect Dracula to fight. Teleports, bats, fire, all of that. Some of his moves can be annoying, but for the most part he isn't too bad. Once you kill him, you collect a lot of loot and finally are done. Wait. The castle? It's getting destroyed! A few seconds after you kill him, Dracula turns into final form Dracula, which is basically him absorbing the power of death and becoming a total monstrosity. This fight, you are constantly falling down, fighting Dracula in the air. You can throw rubble, summon pillars of fire, and even throw meteors. He's a really cool boss, one of the best. He even has a grab attack. Still, none of that is enough, not with the power of dying over and over again until you get it right. After you kill him, he dissipates and his castle completely falls apart. From the distance, you can watch it all go under, along with Alucard and Richter, getting your 4th boss stem cell. Now, before we end this Castlevania segment and go back to regular Dead Cells, one question remains. How does any of this happen? Why is Dracula's castle in Dead Cells? Well, for one, why would you even ask that? It's a cool crossover, you stupid idiot, it's awesome. It doesn't need a reason to exist. Still, if you want fun, I might be able to provide a possibly satisfactory answer. Basically, it all comes down to the clock tower and the timekeeper. This is why Alucard tells you to meet him at the clock room before going to Dracula's castle. For one, time is not something you ever want to mess with. I have already said that. But the thing is, the timekeeper constantly messing with the time of England can have unintended consequences, which actually haven't come up yet, surprisingly. Making time slower, faster, zero. Of course it was going to end badly. That is why the world of Dead Cells is rather warped. In a way, it's like an open hole into another universe. Now, why would Dracula's castle show up? Well, it's because Dracula's castle has something very similar to the clock tower. The clock tower. Yeah, Dracula's castle has a clock tower of its own. There's a structure that appears in a few Castlevania games and is rather iconic to the franchise. Even in the games, it happens to be unique compared to other areas. Now, if I had to guess, the clock tower from Dead Cells managed to fuse with the one in Castlevania. Because of that, the entirety of Dracula's castle got teleported into the world of Dead Cells, becoming a part of it. This is, of course, just a guess. There's no clear lore here, but there is enough to draw a flimsy conclusion. Either way, that is enough of Castlevania. This is a Dead Cells video, and there's still a few biomes I have to go over. So, back to the prisoner's quarters. Man, I wonder how much I got wrong in this part. BC4. No more health flask recharges at all, more scroll fragments, and enemies can now teleport to you. Great. We all know how this goes. Out of the prisons, kill a boss, go to a mid biome, kill a boss, go to the end biome, kill a boss, and don't obtain the 5th boss stem cell. You can't get the 5th boss stem cells from beating the game. So, is that it? Is that the last difficulty? What else is even left? Well, yeah, the giant skeleton. Where did he go? And the item we got from him, we never used that, did we? So, the next quest is to find out where exactly he is. Before that though, there is one other biome I need to go over. The one biome that pretty much went unscathed by the Malays. A place that very much so exists but isn't on any maps of England. The bank. There is no direct route to take if you want to get into the bank. If you have been watching my footage, you will have seen me pass by a chest a few times in the passage. This chest leads to the bank. Every run has one bank. If you choose not to go into it, it won't appear for the rest of the run. But it can also appear pretty much on any level with a passage, replacing the biome you are meant to go into. If you want to, of course. Basically, the bank has a lot of money. It has gold gorgers, agitated pickpockets, and other money-related enemies. It's kind of a complicated biome, so I'm not going to go too deep into some of the technical stuff. I will try to make it simple. Basically, the bank teller sitting at the front desk will give you a key. After that, you get into an elevator until you get to the level where you can use that key. At the end of the path, you get another key, then you repeat the process until you're done exploring. Because the bank is basically the home of the goblins, there are lots of shops here. All the traders you find throughout the game are goblins, and this is basically their base. If you want, you can take a loan. If you don't pay, you will get cursed. Never take a loan. When you first enter, you will see that there's a line of skeletons waiting to get in. The bank teller gives you a pass, telling you to clean the place up for them because, you know, enemies. The bank teller yaps a lot, but isn't important. Just a minimum wage worker. Just a poor person. Deeper into the bank, you can find the archives, which houses a librarian that just shushes you. You can find a goblin with a piggy bank somewhere, celebrating his birthday. If you're feeling generous, you can give him like 5 gold. If not, you can destroy his piggy bank and steal all of his life savings, making him cry on the spot. The choice is yours. In one of the rooms, you can find a mutilated bag. In a hole, you can find a hiding goblin shopkeeper, completely panicked. Apparently, one of the bags in the bank came alive and ate his friend. So, he killed a bunch of bags and started hiding. Of course, some of the bags are still out there, and if you try to buy something from the wrong merchant, the merchant's bag will eat him up, swallow whatever you're trying to buy, and start fighting you. Mimics. Mimics can appear in any biome, but in the bank, one of the shops will always have a mimic. You will know if you come across a hiding goblin lore room. Killing a mimic will increase the tier of whatever you were trying to buy by 2, so it's definitely worth killing them. If you want to, you can commit a heist and steal a bunch of money and an outfit from the bank by going through a wild parkour place. Other than that, there isn't much more to the bank. It isn't even truly part of the island, not physically at least. It is in a weird pocket dimension, which is why it's mostly completely unharmed by the Malays. Not everyone can get in, as shown from the start. So, the Malays can't really spread here, unless one of the goblins truly messes up. Now, I think we can finally move on to the main story. Don't worry, there won't be any more side quests. It is a straight line from here. Back in the graveyard, the entrance to the next biome can be found here, a crystal pathway with a slot that you can put the key item in. After that, we finally get into the cavern. I have talked a lot about the island, but I haven't talked about its main source of income. England was first and foremost not a fishing island. I know, surprising. It was actually a mining island, specializing in exporting crystals. Mining here was a pretty thankless job. The cavern is one of the most dangerous areas in the island, and accidents here were always common. Basically, people died here. A lot. There are ground shakers, arbiters, skeletons, a lot of enemies unique to this biome. It is really just a giant cavern that you explore, taking elevators up and up until you reach where you are meant to reach. You can fall to your death and even fall into lava. The crystals here were not just good for sale though. The alchemist at least didn't think so. This place housed both fire and ice. It wasn't normal. Most likely, the crystals weren't either. So, the alchemist tried to find out as much as he could about the crystals. Eventually, he even takes some to High Peak Castle and even the Slumbering Sanctuary. Whether he found anything out or not, who knows. The king, being the definition of ego, even built statues of himself in a dangerous area like the cavern. He really wanted to colonize the whole place. Truly, England. Once the Malays started spreading, contact with the miners was completely cut off. They dug for months and didn't even know that the kingdom they were mining for was burning down. Not until they died. The people watching over the mine did have contact with the outside world though. All they could do was gossip about the happenings, like the controversy between the giant and the king. How the king chose to slay the giant with a spear, but the giant's killer, the giant that wasn't dead. It's time for the Guardian's Haven. Finally, you can talk to the giant, the first entity you see in the game, even if you thought he was there at the time, the other hand of the king and the guard of the castle's gates. Of course, the disagreements between the giant and the king was a simple case of going too far. And by going too far, I mean the giant pissed the king off, so the king slayed him. The giant kept telling the king that the way he was handling the Malays was horrible, so the king had to shut him up. I'm sure you all understand. I would do the same under my tyranny. After BC 0, you can find a lore room in the prisoner's quarters, detailing the king's orders, telling the guards that the giant wasn't a part of the military anymore, and that they should do whatever they can to keep him dead. The king knew that at some point the giant would get revived. The giant doesn't have a Malay's problem, he's just naturally an undead, and I'm not sure if the Malays can actually affect him either. But anyway, enough of that. The giant knew Bobby, and kind of hates him. He comments on how the Malays has messed up Bobby, but hasn't taken away his arrogance. So, the two start to fight. He's a unique boss. You have to hurt his hands to hurt his eyeball, which actually lowers his health. He shoots lasers, slams the ground with his fists, and drops crystals. Probably the best boss in the game. Technically, you can explore the cavern and fight the giant after BC 0. But if you do that and beat him, he curses the king before dying.
Once prone to all this destruction, you even managed to destroy your own body. My king, you are an incorrigible!
He screams out, giving the middle finger before dying. What a poet. But if you manage to beat him in BC 4, he admits that you have beaten him fairly. Basically, like a timekeeper, he's one of the few bosses that you can't really kill, but just defeat. Likely, he's immortal in some way. After that, he gives you your 5th boss stem cell. Finally, after that, he explodes, giving you a bunch of loot. What a guy. From here, I don't think you need to finish your run, but you can if you want to. There's an elevator that takes you straight to the throne room, skipping an entire biome if you want to. Otherwise, back to the prisoner's quarters we go. Only one mystery left. BC 5. Basically the same as BC 4, except now the malaise is a mechanic. Now you have another bar near your health, signifying how much malaise you have. Basically, the more this bar fills up, the stronger, faster, and more relentless the enemies get. They can become elites, some can just spawn if they feel like it. Oof. And once the bar is fully filled, you die. So, it's not good. You can reduce it via various sources, but overall, it's bad. But that's not the only change though. If you go into a passage, you will notice that the collector is gone, replaced by his intern. He's not actually connected to the collector at all and simply wants your cells in his place. He found some of the alchemist's notes and wants to use cells to experiment with. Uh-oh. As for the collector, don't worry about him. I'm sure he's fine. Still, there is only one thing left to do. If you remember correctly, back when I went over the throne room and the Hand of the King, I mentioned a door that was locked. A door that had 5 circles over it that couldn't be opened. Well, the circles were boss stem cells, and now we have all 5. And once we finally make our way all the way back into the throne room and kill the Hand of the King again, we can see that the fountain is clogged. Basically, the game forces you to move forward, denying you the right to go back into the quarters. And behind the 5 BC door, you see the next level. The main lab of the alchemist. The gift the king had given the alchemist after the creation of High Peak Castle, before the malaise. The place known as the Astrolab. After the malaise had started, the alchemist did most of his work here. Most of his experiments that he couldn't do while roaming England, he did here. The failed experiment enemies that appear from BC 4 onwards are his creation, along with the slammer enemies. It got so bad that at some point, the king had to shut the Astrolab off from the rest of the island, because that too many death machines in it. Failed experiments are some of the strongest enemies in the game, so they had to be locked up. In structure, it's similar to the Fractured Shrines, being a bunch of floating islands. At first, the Astrolab was made to observe the stars, until the malaise hit England, which is why it has such a spacey feel to it. Other than experiments, there are different types of magicians here, probably some other researchers connected to the alchemists. Overall, it is a very dangerous biome, second only to the Direlict distillery. Shivers. In this place, you can find a lot of alchemist notes, from details about the creation of slammers, all of the failed cures, the escaped subjects. This isn't a place of science anymore. He even tried to observe the stars to see if a cure could be found, but nothing. The whole lab, as far as anyone is concerned, is a failure. only one thing that Bobby can do now. Go up into the final biome of the game, the observatory. Only the total elite scientists of the island had access to the observatory, which is just the alchemist. It is the highest point of the island, the very tip of England. And of course, the person you meet here is the collector. Welcome, my mute friends. Do you like my catalyst? Nothing too fancy really, but a necessary tool for the aspiring alchemist. Never mind that. How many wretches did you slay this time? How many cells did you bring me? Would you be kind enough to put them in the catalyst right there? Are you familiar with the myth of the Punkia? The cure to all disease, distilled from the crude essence of life itself. Well, if you believe the first alchemists, drivel from a bunch of senile old fools. Fairy tales for the gullible children. Just look at you. Dependence, loss of empathy, lust for violence, insanity, endless death. Nothing good can come of messing with cells. But then, I've already scoured the entire island, scavenging from the remains of the fallen, and even the bellies of the living. Few were willing to help, and he begged for mercy. Is this all I've got? The false hope of a bunch of children's stories. Pathetic.
Actually, this feels awesome! I've never felt anything quite right yet. Be a good sport and bring me some more. I'll send you back. Time for your medicine.
Yes, the collector is the alchemist. As you can tell, there is an alchemist that shows up every generation. The intern will also eventually become an alchemist at some point, even if he doesn't actually have anything to do with the current alchemist. It's not clear how he made the Punkia, but if I had to guess, he made it from the combination of the gardener's research with plants, the apostate's research with souls, and his own research with the sap, and also the cells he got from Bobby, all of which represents the different colored rooms in High Peak Castle. With all that knowledge, he managed to create the Punkia. After he drinks the Punkia, he falls before transforming into a boss, the final boss of the game. He teleports you to different rooms using many different kinds of attack to fight you, from lasers, fireballs, tornadoes, even bombs. Every time you lower his health to a certain point, he drinks from his Punkia and heals himself. Finally, the alchemist managed to create a cure. The Punkia is the only thing that can fight the malaise consistently. Not that it matters, because in this game, you don't play as the hero, you play as a survivor. And if even Jesus himself wants to kill you, you will fight back. And so, after the alchemist drops his Punkia by mistake, you drink it and defeat him. You let him ramble on for a bit, before finally stomping his head dead. After that, Bobby's body starts deteriorating. The Punkia was working, but because his body was fully infected, and it wasn't really his own, it was dying. At the very least, he wouldn't have to suffer until the very end. of the kingdom. Except only his body dissipates, the one he possessed. If you remember, I mentioned that Bobby is immune to the malaise. His real body, which is just a blob, doesn't get affected by the punkia, so he just slithers away, awkwardly, forgetting his epic speech about the fallen kingdom, back to the prisoners' quarters. Back to the prisoners' quarters! So, what else can you do? As Bobby starts to wonder about that question, he gets kidnapped by the timekeeper. The timekeeper scolds him, berates him, because now she has to mess with the loop again. The alchemist shouldn't have died, not yet. So, she starts reversing the clock, and after doing that, she kicks Bobby back out of the clock room. But she made a mistake. She opened the wrong portal, sending Bobby into another timeline instead of the prisoner's quarters. This is why you don't mess with time. How many times do I have to say this? This is also the same phenomena that most likely brought Dracula's castle into the island. So, now Bobby is in another timeline. A timeline before he killed the king. At least that's how it works. Maybe. Time is weird. Anyway, the most diabolical thing ever. You have to beat BC5 twice to get the true ending. And so, you climb once again all the way to the top. The world is kinda glitchy, some NPCs are weird. And overall the whole island is the same, but you know, little glitchy. You get up through the fire and the flames, ending up back in the throne room once again. And once again, the king's body is here. And after going through the whole hassle and beating the hand of the king, you break the barrier protecting him once again. You have the option to kill him or possess his body. Except this would be a different position. Actually, it wouldn't be a position at all. This would be a return. The king is finally alive again. You are the king. Bobby is the king. Welcome back, Your Majesty. Throughout the course of me making the script for this video, it was clear that you were meant to think that Bobby is one of two characters. Either the alchemist or the king. The giant pretty much reveals who you are, but I wanted to put the twist here because lol. So, now that Bobby has his body, his real one, again, he has a goal. The malaise hasn't fully ruined his body yet. He can finally talk again. He can live again. Only if he gets the final thing he needs. That is, he goes to the Astrolab, conquers it once again, and goes on to kill the alchemist again. And so, after Mr. Butterfingers drops his pankia again, Bobby steals it and drinks from it before killing the alchemist once again. After that, finally, Bobby's old body fuses with his blobby body, immune to the malaise. So, not only are you actually the villain of the game, not only are you the one that caused the most problems, not only did you kill the hero of the story, but you are also the only survivor. Most likely, the Timekeeper's loop breaks down after that, which is why people like the Hand of the King don't get revived. As for the Timekeeper, there's a real possibility that Bobby just went on to kill her to stop her loops. Long live the king! Long live the king! Long live the king! Long live the king! After who knows how long, Bobby starts to get bored. Exploring the sewers, killing his old citizens, dying non-stop, those were the days. He starts drinking, reminiscing about how fun those days were. That is, until Bobby comes across. Bobby, the one belonging to this timeline. He gets up and dances a little. The other Bobby dances back. He flips the other Bobby off. He gets flipped back. And finally, he charges at the other Bobby. And the other Bobby charges back. Congratulations! You have beat the game. You were the most evil person all along, David. No more quarters for you, you villain. Now, the only real remaining question is, when did Bobby turn into a homunculus? And why was his body still in the throne room? Did he plan for it to happen? Sadly, there is no way to really know. Dead Cells likely won't get any more updates in the future, so this is what we're left with. There's a very good chance that stuff like curses, the king's transformation into a homunculus, and the origin of the malaise would get expanded upon in future updates. This, of course, didn't happen. What we have now is very close to complete, but it could have been more. We still don't really know why Motion Twins told Evil Empire to stop working on the game, and it's likely we will never know. Of course, maybe only some of what I said would get expanded upon, but it would still be better than nothing. There are likely some things that I have gone wrong, and if you spot them, you can tell me. Besides that, the funniest thing to me is that the only character who doesn't hate the king is the queen. The queen doesn't blame the king at all. She only blames the malaise. She did actually like Bobby. Bobby was many things. A tyrant, a killer, a psycho, mental. But he wasn't a bad husband, apparently. He's horrible, unless you're his lover. The only people who don't hate him are the Hand, which is a simp, and the Queen. Everybody else hates him. Yet, he's the only one that gets a good ending. Honestly, it makes me proud. Dead Cells, while having a pretty deep lore, is, first and foremost, a comedy when it comes to storytelling. So, an ending like this is very fitting. Like, subscribe, comment, dislike, just give me engagements. And watch my other videos too if you want. Even if you know nothing about whatever I'm covering, you will be able to enjoy them. Just put them on the background. And with that, I can finally delete 60 gigabytes of Dead Cells footage from my laptop. Jesus.